Today on the show, we've got Darcy Norman. Darcy has over 20 years of experience in the human performance industry. He's currently a performance coach for the US men's national soccer team and director of performance for Kitman Labs. He worked as a performance data analyst and fitness rehab coach with the German men's national team from 2012 to 2018, helping them to win the 2014 World Cup. And after that, he took a director role as director of performance with Italian club AS Roma, where the side outperformed expectation to reach the semi in the UEFA Champions League. Prior to that, Darcy worked as the strength coach and rehab specialist for Bayern Munich. Amongst other roles, he's a licensed physical therapist, athletic trainer, and strength and conditioning specialist, and worked as the director of performance innovation at Exos, and as a physical therapist and performance coach at Athletes Performance. In today's conversation, Darcy speaks openly about his current role with the US national team and what they are looking to achieve. And I hope you enjoy some of the insights he provides from his wealth of experience and diverse background.
This episode of the Informed Performance podcast has been sponsored by Lead Performance, makers of the Force Frame. Used by health and performance professionals for assessing and improving performance and rehabilitation, the Force Frame is a powerful solution for quickly and accurately testing isometric strength and imbalances. In addition to testing athletes, the Force Frame is also used to maintain and improve strength, offering over 130 isometric training protocols. As a portable and easy-to-use system, the Force Frame is designed to ensure every measurement can be accurately and reliably measured, time after time again. To learn more about the Force Frame, visit our sponsor, voldperformance.com.
So welcome to another edition of Informed Performance podcast. My name's Ben Ashworth, and today on the show, it's a real pleasure to welcome Darcy Norman. Welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. I know we've chatted about this for a while, so it's great to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So first things first, Darcy, can you give the listeners a little bit of background about yourself and sort of take us up to where you are at the moment?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it short and sweet. So grew up in Canada, grew up, playing a bunch of sports. Ski racing was my sport, which got me down to college in the US. Ended up with degrees in kinesiology, pre-med or biology and physical therapy. So ended up being certified in athletic trainer, strength coach, and physical therapist. Ended up having a private practice in Seattle when I was done with all my schooling. And then joined what was Athletes Performance back in 2003, which is now Exos. Wanted to get back to the mountains, so we moved to Lake Tahoe, California, which is where I'm currently based now, with a few stints over to Europe, both working in professional cycling, Bayern Munich, the German national team, then went back to Europe and worked at Rome as the director of performance there. And then, came back to get our kids out of school and had the opportunity to join Greg Berhalter as the new head coach of the U.S. men's national team. And then also get on with another passion of mine, which is, kind of data and the use of data. And so got on board with Kitman Labs and really excited about both journeys.
I mean, we've already given the listeners a bit of a 25-minute introduction to your background as well. And, I know you've spoken about one of your strengths before as being the breadth of experience. And certainly that's massive, from an appreciation of all the ends of the spectrum going into a performance environment. I want to start with Kitman because actually that's where we came across each other properly for the first time. And one of the things Kitman talks about is like the actual sort of add-on or added value of you working with teams to try and have an impact essentially with this data analysis. So, lots of companies are doing it. Lots of companies have got data. What is it that's special about what you're doing with Kitman around how you're integrating with teams, first of all, Darcy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Big answer. I would say the first one is that we're actually trying to understand what the goals the teams are trying to accomplish. So we go through what's called a performance discovery process with the teams to really sit down and understand, okay, they're on this data journey and everyone's on their own their own journey, has had their own experiences, whether they've tried to build stuff on their own or try to do different data analysis within their organizations, if they've been successful, if they failed, and how come, and all these pieces. So really trying to understand what they're trying to do. So in 2, 3, 5 years, if everything was running perfectly, what would that look like? And then, what has kind of kept them from that, achieving those goals to this point? And essentially kind of reverse engineering that process to see how our tools and experience can help them achieve that. So, we got a team of applied performance specialists. I sit in our kind of performance strategist role. And then we have a full-blown data science team, besides all the engineers and UI people that are building the platform. And so, we got a lot of people that have come from high level sport, given their input on how to move these things forward. And then once that happens, we create essentially a project list of what we're trying to accomplish and the timelines that we're going to go after it and get them done. And away we go. And then we're, revisiting those quarterly, to make sure we're not, expectations are met. We're not running into any obstacles or hurdles that we have to kind of sort out. And then it's just a very iterative process in moving them forward. And, I think that the one thing that people got to understand is this is a new frontier, essentially, right? Like, we've been around a while and we've been dealing with data for a while for sure. But in the grand scheme of things, the things that we're trying to do, the things that we're trying to accomplish, the newer innovations and technologies that are out there, it's all brand new. And so a lot of the things you come across, people haven't solved for yet. And so you're trying to figure out what's the best way to solve for this. And like any complex system, you uncover a couple problems or solve for a few problems, and that uncovers or creates a new set of problems that you got to go solve for. And so, having the fortitude to hammer through all those things to get you where you need to go. So I would say that's the big one. And then the platform itself is, an intelligence platform that, aggregates all your medical data, your performance data, technical, tactical data, whatever, kind of questionnaires or wellness subjective information, so that you can do analysis on it in real time, almost like applied research within the system. And we actually have a new tool that's, from doing all these bespoke data analysis with teams, which is one of the things that we offer. What are the common pieces that these teams keep asking for? And so we're going to be launching this risk advisor product where essentially you build the model just like you would do any kind of research. You'd figure out what your end value is. What are the constraints of what you're trying to apply? And then, the system runs the model and produces a SHAP plot of what are the relatable metrics that are leading up to the question that you're trying to answer around this particular injuries, group of injuries. And then so you have a transparent view of where that risk is coming from. And so you can then go actually do something about it. And so, it's just trying to take all the stuff that we've been doing in our respective teams, and put them in an automated way that, more people have access to greater abilities.
It must be great to be practicing in a performance environment yourself and having exposure to working with the people who are involved with Kitman on a day-to-day basis, and then applying that with some of the best teams. So on that ground, what insights have you gained from your Kitman experiences that have perhaps influenced the way you're now working with the US national team? Seems like a great, melting pot for your own development.
Absolutely. And I think, anybody listening to this will probably be nodding their head up and down. When I say this, I would say the biggest common denominator is a clear vision of what you're trying to accomplish and how you're trying to accomplish it. And, I didn't really appreciate it until I got to Rome, when I was responsible for putting that mission and vision in place. I always thought that kind of stuff was cliche, business books. But until we did it and saw the power of it and the direction that, when you can get, when people realize what their own values are and how they can be put together in a shared value system, what that can do to really bring a group together to execute on a plan is unbelievable. And so, since those are the people that I've searched out to work with and work for, are people that have that kind of similar mindset. And that's exactly, kind of what we have with the national team. And so super fortunate to, be working with Greg Berhalter and all the technical, tactical staff, to Steve Tastian, who, who's got boatloads of experience and certainly believes in those ideals. Jordan Webb, another, phenomenal strength coach, a sports science guy. And then the whole medical team with Kenny and Ron and the group. It's been awesome.
And we'll come on to that stuff that you're doing with the national team, because I know, you've got your own vision, which we'll talk about a bit later, and happy to share a lot of this great stuff that you're doing there. I want to get a little bit more sort of granular around some of these specific, almost, I suppose what the question I'm asking is like, what's best practice out there with some of the teams you have been exposed to? So they've got these values and beliefs and they've got this vision and everything's aligned, but are there any sort of examples you can give without maybe giving away names of what that looks like, so that the listeners can perhaps get a bit more insight into a specific example?
Yeah, I mean, I can use, the national team as an example. Our mission is to change the way the world views American soccer. And, how do you do that in your respective areas? The players have to do it on the field with how they behave and how they execute game plans and play. We as a performance staff have to do that on, taking the best practices of performance, trying to integrate them in a holistic way and get the buy-in of the staff and the players to move forward. And the coaches have to do that from a planning, communication, education, from their end. And so, the biggest way I think to do that is be 100% transparent. And, that when you're transparent in what you're doing, you certainly get a lot of feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. And, but if you're open to it, then you start to, see like, oh yeah, wow, never really thought about that. That's great. Let's add it into the mix. Or how do we add it into the mix? What are the constraints we have that we can't add it into the mix? And then there's, when we go into camps, we do kind of pre and post mortems. So Greg sets out the objectives for what we're trying to achieve in the respective camps. As a group, we sit down and talk about them before we get going and how we're going to execute them. And then, we do the postmortems after the camps. Did we achieve them? Why not? What do we do better next time to move it forward? And, when we're constantly reviewing our values, which is like, preparation, have a plan, make a better plan, communication. You can't communicate enough, selflessness. So, anytime you can help out, just like a soccer team, sometimes the defender's got to, play forward, and sometimes the forward's got to defend with the goal of getting the ball in the net. And it's no different in our group. And so it's just an extremely integrated group of people that, are communicating openly, honestly, to build that trust factor. And then, trying to iterate things on how can we do this better constantly. And so, with what we've been able, with the structure that Greg has set up in the team, it's allowed everybody to take the organizational ability and execution to a level that I've never been a part of until now. And it really shows you what is possible if people kind of set their egos aside, all dig into a common shared mission and, with some clear values and get after it. So, yeah, it's been exciting. And like I said, it's been great of what we've been able to accomplish, like even from our data and the integration of how we program and plan with the coaching staff and how we're able to forecast, probably within about 5% or less, a lot of times, how much a guy is going to run in a particular training session. And then, the coach saying, hey, this is what I need to get out of it. And Steve, who does a lot of our on-field planning, saying, okay, based on those constraints, we're right where we need to be. And, based on long-term plan and, And, it's just this constant iterative process, but it takes a lot of trust and communication to make those things happen.
There'll be a lot of people who've put together some really nice load projection models that aren't being used by coaches. So there'll be people they'll probably be swerving off the road listening to this, or, going, for God's sake, I need to go and work in the US. That sounds like a phenomenal environment. So
yeah. And I mean, it depends. Like you've been with some unbelievable teams, right? And organizations, and you see it right away, whoever is leading the group. So whether it's heads of performance or, heads of medical or head coaches, like it's pretty telling right away. Are they inclusive, and willing to build that trust and have a clear vision or not? And I think, when you said, what are some of the telling signs, those, if people can clearly articulate what they're trying to accomplish, I'm like, okay, these guys are, they're probably on a good way. If it's back and forth, or you talk to 3 or 4 different people within their organization, they're all telling you different things, then, it's probably, they probably got work to do.
Yeah, we spoke a bit off air actually, and I wanted to talk to you about this because you've worked in the club environment. You're now working for a national team, and communication between club and country isn't always seamless, as you know. But it sounds like you've got to a really nice place where you're openly sharing information with clubs. And can you share a bit of that with the listeners? It sounds like a utopia again.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back. So I think, if you look at trust being the number one piece, right, to making all this stuff work, then you have to be transparent and you have to be vulnerable to criticism and feedback. And so that's with our interactions with the respective teams and groups, that's how we look at it. And so if anybody wants to know what we're doing, we're more than happy to talk through it and show them, what we're doing. And so our thought, is working in a club, one of the frustrations that I had, and as did Steve and others, was that when our players went to the national teams, we had no idea what they did, when they got back. And so you're trying to put them back into the mix and move them along. And so we vowed right from the get-go is that we're going to try and keep track of everything we do. And we're going to make it readily available to the players, to their clubs and their ownership. So they know exactly what that guy's done when he's with us. And then, Jordan built out some phenomenal systems so that any team can log into the system, at any time and see what that player has done. And so they can get it in real time. As the data goes up into the system, they can see it. So daily they can monitor their player from afar. And then after camp, they can download that data, and we work hard to put it in formats that they can, put it up into their system. So they have this continuity of data. And so as a result of that, we just ask for that back from the teams. And we know that not all teams have maybe the resources that we have, or the technical ability, or, even the experience to put those kind of structures together. So, we're also willing to work with them to help them in that process and move along if they needed. But, the response has been phenomenal. If you kind of take that first step to put out your hand, and, then usually the teams have been great to reciprocate. So, we ask for 4 weeks of data before players come into camp, so we can kind of put them into our models and see, how they're going to phase out based on what we have planned out. And we share our plan with the teams so they can see what their player, if they were to play all 3 games, what would that look like from a loading perspective? And then as the data is actualized, day to day from training, that goes up and they can see it and pull it. And, it's been great. Like, again, it just comes back to that trust, transparency, and openness.
Yeah, it sounds great. And I think, from a player individualization perspective, I suppose when you're working with the national team, if you're there for a while, you start to build a really good picture of those players and what it looks like for them in a training camp environment or maybe a competition block where you get them for that condensed period of time and then they go back. So it's nice that you've got this lead-in information when they come to you. They're not coming in cold. You can start to look at the data in the way you look at data anyway over that sort of long period of time. So I suspect that helps you individualize a little bit more when they're with you. Is there anything else you do to specific with players to individualize things within a national team environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like anything in a team sport. You kind of go to the lowest common denominator first, right? And then you start to peel the layers. And so, in part of the information that we get back from the player or the teams around the players is lifting, individual programming, those things besides kind of their independent workloads. We get nutrition, supplementation information that we have. So we can, we kind of have what we call our pill boxes, that we fill them up so they can keep on with that. We're sharing blood values. So when we go to train it and play like this upcoming window, playing at altitude, we need to make sure that their iron and vitamin D supplementation is up to snuff for recovery and performance reasons at altitude. And so we're communicating with the clubs on that and trying to get plans put in place. So, we realize that the player is it's the club's player. That's who they play for. And so we're just the facilitator to keep them moving and operating at a high level so they can, obviously perform well for us and continue to perform well for the club. And if they can do both, then everyone's going to be successful, not only the player, but both teams in moving the needle forward. So, as far as when it comes into camp, we start out with we call it like a first level movement screen. And essentially it's a yoga session that we do in smaller groups that all our practitioners participate in from an evaluation standpoint, but I'll lead it. And it's just, like I said, if you were a passerby would think they were doing some kind of yoga stretching session. And we just go take the guys through a bunch of ranges of motion at end ranges. So the various practitioners in the room can assess and see like, oh, something look amiss, is one side look worse than another, or, when I get and rotate over one shoulder, they're going all the way around and the other one, they're going half as much. And so we do that. And then from there in our performance meetings, we're taking in the information from the clubs, the first level movement screen, and then we're building out the week for the team based on, the needs that we have as well as a team. And then, we travel kind of gym in a bag, and we've been using a product called Beaver Fit, which is this kind of Beaver Fit box that articulates up to a squat rack, essentially, that you can hang TRXs and bands. And we use another product called Anchor, which is a traveling pulley system. And then we also travel with a couple power blocks, from dumbbells. So, by no means is it a perfect gym, but it at least allows us to get to be able to, do the programming with the players the best way possible. And then we try and pick locations that have better accessibility to, gyms with better equipment and so forth. So that kind of goes into the planning side. So we're setting these guys up for success in every way, shape, or shape, and getting into it. And then, I think for a lot of teams, it's the consistent touch points with the medical staff, the wellness questionnaires, monitoring the data as they're doing it on a day-to-day basis to see how they're responding, before training, getting them in for any nuanced stuff that they need. And then just, monitor, manage, and repeat, and then track all that and give it back to the clubs as we go forward. And there's been times where we'll do individual evaluations, whether it's video movement evaluations, 1080 sprint, force velocity profiling, things like that. But we share all those reports back with the clubs. So, with any things that we see that they could possibly benefit from and keep the player moving in the right direction.
Sounds pretty comprehensive work there, mate. I'm going to go back a little bit to something you said earlier, take a bit of a right turn. You're talking about the technical, tactical side of things, and it sounds like, you're well integrated in your current environment. How do you how do you integrate the technical, tactical with the physical? Because one of the problems that we all face when we're trying to support coaches essentially is to enable them to play the way they want to play, to train the players they want to train, and that's that can come up against some big differences. So how are you integrating that tactical and perhaps physical information?
Yeah, it's a great question because, being with a guy that, worked with 11 coaches in over a 13-year span, sometimes it was a lot of reinventing the wheel. And I think the first is, trying to really understand what they're trying to accomplish, right? And I think everyone's got the greatest needs of everybody in mind. It's just how you choose to get there. And, luckily, Steve and Greg had worked a lot together at Columbus prior, and so had some really good systems in place that they just brought with them to the national team to help, move the needle forward quicker. And so, we just see what the goals of the day are based on, is this a preseason camp? Are we in a little window that we're just trying to keep guys moving? So is the focus going to be recovery or not? And what things based off this data that we're getting from teams and how many minutes guys have played, what we're anticipating. So it kind of comes back to that one value: have a plan, make a better plan. So we kind of plan out all these different scenarios to see how we can adjust. And I'll tell you a little example of that after this. But, from there, we have a drill library that Jordan has built out, and a whole drill planner calculator. So Steve can go in there and say, okay, our projected load might be whatever, 2,000 or maybe 3,000 meters of distance and only 800 meters of HML. We use StatSport as our tool, GPS tool, with so many accels and decels. And so, Greg will be like, okay, we're going to warm up. We're going to do a possession game. Here's some rules of the games. And we're going to get into some functional activity. And then we're going to finish with some game form, some small sided games. And, and here's the objectives and principles that we're trying to accomplish. And so we go into our drill builder, we pick the rules, we pick the games, we look at historical data based on those rules and filters. And, we can get a really good idea of what the guys are going to be able to do in that training session. And so, Steve will plan out a whole training camp. And then, we'll, as the camp's going along and see how we're doing, we'll, massage it. And then, then we go out and actualize it. And so, trying to accomplish what we want objectively, what we want, physically, technically, tactically. So we're, all those pieces are in mind when that session's being built and executed on. And, then it's going, do it. And then, if our numbers are way off from that day, we're like, what happened? Oh, maybe Greg got a little fired up and let the functional exercises go too long, and that, through our numbers. And so how can we rein that in a little bit? Or, maybe we didn't have enough, drills in our drill library to really give us some accurate numbers. And so Jordan's even built some statistical tools so we can see what our reliability and variability in the drills are to get that number that we're looking to use. So, it's a team effort all the way around. But man, when everybody's, pulling their weight and doing what they need to, you can do some amazing things. It's great to be a part of it, for sure.
So no one's running around setting themselves on fire when someone's done 5 extra meters of zone 6 then?
No, I mean, there is variability. And I think we all realize that, okay, we set this number, but, to your point, if you go 10 over, 15 over, 20 over, like the world is not going to end. You're just, how do we set this target? And then that's where you massage the later days, to compensate for any of that stuff. And looking at the, hey, if we go at this pace, we might do 2,000 extra meters that we weren't anticipating. And that might be a problem. Because, those little decisions add up over time. And so it's just, if you have awareness in those day-to-days, it makes the bigger picture items a lot tighter in the long run.
Right, we've warmed you up now, so I'm going to ask a direct question, largely because if you give me the right answer that I'm looking for, I'll use you and quote you and your experience to help me in my environment. Right.
All right, let's see.
So, match day -2, 2 days before a match. What is optimal in terms of the kind of volume intensity of a session? Obviously, there's people who won't understand GPS metrics, but be as like granular as you can there. And I'm going to hold you to this, whatever you answer. There we go.
All right. Perfect. I would say, so I'm going to kick it off with, it depends, and you can do whatever the hell you want. Because I think what really depends on that game day -2, which is all critical, right? Like this is kind of that other piece, is understanding people's mental models of what did you do before that and what's coming after that. And then what's the intention of what you did before that. And then, what the intention is for what's coming after that. And so in our particular model, and it changes just based on where we think we can get what we need from a loading perspective. So we might start high and finish low, as it relates to a game. So you might do a game day -3, is your big loading day. We drop it a little bit, really drop it game day before, and then, you play your game. I would say our default model would be, we would train hard that game day 3-4 and have more of a, kind of a accel decel day, leg loading, high speed day, more open pitches. And then that game day -2 would be a lower day, 2 to 3K, really low HML, very minimal accels, decels in that 25 bucket. So really easy. And then, bring it back up before the day and then bang it out, but as you know, there's a ton of different ways to model this stuff out, and the human body's adaptable. And so, you're just trying to figure out, and that's where, when we get these projections put together, if guys have been used to modeling one way and we're doing it another, what do we need to consider to maybe like, hey, you know what, we'll put this guy, we'll kind of maintain his modeling with what he was doing. So where we really need him are in these 2 drills, and then, he'll be out and we can do something, and we can pick it up in other ways, on the next day to make sure it all works out in the wash. And so I think that's where your systems and how they're created, and, being able to kind of sushi menu, the different pieces and have creativity in that allows you to do that, and kind of comes back to your individualization question as well.
No, you gave the exact right answer, so I was really happy with that. I'm going to edit out the "it depends" and just literally give that direct answer that you gave for our listeners. It's just going to set you right up.
That's great.
Oh no, it's perfect, absolutely perfect. I obviously I'm tongue in cheek there. I think from experience, as you say, massaging it, and it does depend on the week load. I toy with it a little bit in terms of, the individual. Again, some people like to do something a little bit more, different sports, different cultures, different environments as well. You see people who want to go harder on days where you want them to recover a little bit more. So there is some scope within the program to make those adjustments. And I think that's right. And, when we were at Arsenal, we used to sort of look at the -2 day as being pretty critical, and certainly the combination of the -2, -1. And we started to correlate that against the performances on match day to see, was it affecting them in terms of that output and performance? If we went too high on those days in total, did that then affect basically what was left in the tank for the game, which was ultimately what we were trying to prepare for. Yeah.
And then that accumulation effect. Yeah, and then the accumulation effect. I think you could get away with it, maybe 1 game or 2 games. But when you're going, an English week, and that starts stacking up, and you keep making that mistake, like something's going to give.
Yeah, game 5, it doesn't matter what data you collect or what you're doing. If you do 5 in a row, you're fingers crossed on the bench going, please get these boys through this. Yeah, exactly. So that sort of leads us nicely on. We've worked out that the US team is now beautifully planning and loads and managing loads. So that's great from an injury perspective. Recovery, right? So I'll kick this off, and I think I've heard you speak about this before, and there's some similar sort of thoughts. I'm always concern when coaches kind of go, well, we're going to train hard and we're going to then regenerate harder, right? So it's like we're going to maximize this recovery period to get over what we've just basically overloaded. Now, you've talked about efficiency before, and I just wanted to pick your brains on kind of recovery and how you see it based on your experiences.
Yeah. Probably another kind of high level, right? Because recovery comes in a lot of forms, mentally, physically, in that regard. I think even your communication of objectives, it leads to how well your players recover. Because if you set it up and say, hey, Ben, and there's, I think, some classic leadership stories around this stuff. Like, hey, Ben, this is going to be a freaking hard week. It's going to be crushing. We're going to run the hell out of you this week. But then, and we're going to have this one day, we'll recover, and then we're going to play this game. Then you got some recovery afterwards, and we're going to dial you in exactly the way you need to be. But it's going to be hard, and you're going to need to rise to the occasion. You're like, okay, you know what? Let me soak that in, get it on board, and then, away we go and be like, all right, Ben, this is the hard day, buddy. Here's where we really got to get it out of you. And, and you're working, be like, Ben, it's not hard enough. I know you got a couple more sprints in you. Okay, I'm trying. Okay, great. And then, we go on to the next day, and we're constantly communicating with you where you're sitting and how you're doing. When it comes to that recovery day, you're like, dude, I did exactly what they wanted. They're super happy. And like, I feel good about that. And by the way, like, I did way harder. Like that last coach I had, like, he ran the shit out of me. And like, that was brutal. This was nothing. I think mentally right there, they know you have a plan. They know you're organized. And they know that you're kind of put together with what you're doing. So from that side of it, that trust in, like, I trust them that they know I will be ready and to perform. And then, it's all the other good stuff of just, the soft tissue stuff, providing all the different environments, whether it's, the cold plunge, getting in the pool, unloading the joints, seeing family, hanging out with friends, dinners, laughing, joking, getting some games together, like all that stuff to build that, on top of it, I think is critical to the overall picture, where it's not just like, hey, we're going to work and then you're going to rest and then we're going to work again and then you're going to rest. It's a lot more dynamic, as in that picture. And so I think, again, it comes back to planning, organizing, and how can you maximize those environments so you're getting it from, group healing, individual healing, both mentally, physically, and then individually based on what they need, what their needs are. And so, one of the other things that, like for the World Cup, for instance, it was all about convenience. And so the way we had our place set up, by the ping pong table, it was outside. We had some cold plunges. So the guys would play and they were like, all right, loser has to get in the cold plunge, or, and then you throw a few foam rolls or sticks there. And, while guys were watching, they're like, oh, I might as well get on a foam roll or a stick. And so there's all these like little conveniences as well, and availabilities that they don't have to go out of their way to make it happen. They can just make it happen in their day to day. It kind of flows. It's like when you're, you start at home, you go to work, and on the way you got a nice coffee shop, and one just leads to another. You roll in, get your work, you roll out, you pick up your groceries and the flowers for the wife, and roll home, and everything is bliss. That's what we aspire to. Doesn't always happen, but that's what we aspire to.
I think the other thing around recovery is, do you think that, for example, stronger players recover faster? Is that Is that something you believe in? Yeah,
100%. Right. Like, yeah. And I think you can do the two fitness, like you can have fitness, right, the metabolic piece, or you can do the strength. Like if we look at it in the weight room, and both apply, right? Like the more fit I am, the higher my threshold, then if we have two guys, one's got a higher threshold, one's got a lesser of a threshold, and they're both running speeds right below the low guy's threshold, his work is going to be a lot harder, for him than the guy with the high threshold. And the same thing on the strength side. If one guy is way stronger and another guy is not as strong, and you're doing activity that's right below the not as strong guy, that's going to be a lot harder on his system than the guy that's really strong. So in theory, I think you can make guys more fit by having them pound for pound as strong as possible, 100%. And not only from the muscle tissue perspective, but just the overall recovery. Because you're like, if one guy is fit and stronger than another guy, and they're both doing the 12K in a certain way, it's just not going to be as demanding on the guy that's more fit and stronger, bottom line. And so they won't have worked as hard. They'll recover quicker because their expenditure relatively will be lower.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, and I believe this, having worked with a few pretty high performing players from the physical perspective on the pitch, there's some players that it doesn't matter if they're, however strong they are, their demands on the pitch are so high that if you don't look after them in a different way to the others, they are going to have some issues. I mean, I can think of some box-to-box midfielders and other people who are just overreaching a lot of the time, And okay, you can say you can bring their capacities up, which we have done, but then beyond that, it's just these super performers, the ones that hit, the 12Ks, the ones that, in terms of volume, the ones that hit massive amounts of high intensity distances. It's a big challenge to cope with those guys.
Yeah. And I think, that's where that kind of car analogy always works well, right? Like if you have a Ferrari, if you have a high horsepower engine, in a Volkswagen frame, that frame's going to get twisted and beat up, right? From hitting the accelerators, the brakes, and just roasting. That thing's going to get all torqued. And so, what we're trying to do is build a better suspension, build a better frame, have, more resilient brakes, and so that they can tolerate those demands. And the goal is obviously building a car that's can handle the day in, day out of the racing, kind of like the Le Mans, right? Like, they build a car that can handle that. Then, they can race longer, they can race at a more consistent and reliable tempo.
Yeah, I think that brings us kind of nicely onto a sort of return to play model as well. So, often there's this, it's semantics, but people talk about return to play or return to performance or, return to training. And I'm quite clear when we try and set return targets that we say, well, this is return to training. This is return to one game. So it's like play, but return to performance is about sustainability, like you're talking about there, basically conditioning that player to be able to cope, not just with that first performance, but then especially in the climate we are with those repeated, 2 performances in 7 days and maybe even more. Is there anything you sort of change when you're looking at that return to play aspect with regard to kind of putting or getting conditioning into these guys earlier to ensure that they can manage themselves better and sustain performances when they come back to that pitch related?
Yeah, 100%. And, that's a whole nother topic, right? That you could run conferences off of. And, I think the interesting thing about this is that there is so much you can do, as while somebody is injured, that will benefit them in the greater good when they get back to whatever that performance is, right? So, like a classic one is maybe you're an ACL person, and you're spinning the bike for range of motion. It's early on in your rehab. You're not running, obviously. But, after a couple weeks, like you're spinning a bike, so why not spin that bike at a tempo with a metabolic heart rate that will improve your aerobic ability in that? Why not create some planning where you might do some carbohydrate periodization to improve fat adaptation to, help with performance, down that road. And then, as you do that early on in the rehab, that'll have a knock-on effect of what capacities you've given them for when they do start to run or get back to the team. And so, I think there's a ton of things that we can do, and it's a little bit near and dear to my heart because my daughter, who just is kind of making her way to be a pro snowboarder, unfortunately tore her ACL. And so, like she's a month out, and we're doing wall drills in preparation for running and loading and all these things. And she's a month, kind of post ACL, but at the same time, she's working on her quad sets and her extension and all her pillar stability, but in the structure of kind of running form, and so there's a ton of those little things that you can do, if it's just well thought out and you kind of question current kind of thinking. There's a lot of things that you can do that will help that knock-on effect for sure for when they come back, rather than feeling like, oh, we can't do this until we get to there, and we can't do that until we get to there. There's a lot of things you can kind of gamification or gamify to get you there quicker.
Yeah, the what can you do rather than the what can't you do is definitely my philosophy as well. And you often get to a point when you sort of return to play and you're monitoring stuff and you go, hang on a second, we've gone for the last 2 weeks on the pitch, and actually we really haven't got in enough of this. And on reflection, it sort of comes back to what you were saying about this plan, do, review, is how do you create these feedback loops so you don't miss stuff as it's happening, so that you make sure you get in the conditioning when you can, even though you can't maybe do it so much on the pitch. And then how does that sort of swap over when you get back onto the pitch? What other stuff can you continue to do to make sure you don't, like neglect strength work as an example, to you don't neglect maybe some of the conditioning elements that they haven't been able to necessarily do because of the short nature of the injury. Those bits and pieces they require a really good team that's open and can point those things out to each other, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you hit it right on the nose for sure.
Darcy, I am, conscious of your time, and it's been a real pleasure to get you on the show and just have a chat, mate. I didn't know where this conversation was going, but with the two of us on here, it could have been quite general, but I've really, really enjoyed it, and I'm sure the listeners will have too. The last thing to say is, where can people find you, like to follow you or get in touch with you?
Yeah. Thank you for the time. It's been great and long overdue to get together for sure. I know our worlds have kind of gone apart with you going to the other side of Europe and me back to North America. So it's been great to get together and talk shop, and we'll definitely have to do this more. I'm not a big social media guy. I think I'm just too busy at times to do too much on social media, but at Darcy Norman on Twitter. I'm learning how to use Instagram through my kids and Snapchat. So I'm probably aging myself a little bit on that one. I'm on LinkedIn. You can email me at either darcy@kitmanlabs.com. I kind of pride myself in getting back to people. It may not be that moment, but within some days. And then my dnorman@ussoccer.org is my national team email as well. So always happy to hear from people. Always happy to hear how we can do things better, whether it's new equipment on the market, new techniques, new whatever. We're always looking to try and get the most out of things. So happy to hear from anybody.
And to the listeners, he means it as well, because I reached out to Darcy, and he's certainly been someone who I've kept in touch with, and has been great on that front. So thanks for that, Darcy. It's been great. Great to have you on the show.
Appreciate you reaching out.
Of course, mate. No problem. Last thing to say is good luck to your daughter in her rehab and recovery, and hope she smashes it out of the park.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's all part of the journey. As devastating as those can be, I think you learn a lot in the process. And so her new focus of learning is strength and conditioning, therapy, I've even joked with her because she's kind of writing her own plans and programs, and she's really getting into it. So we're kind of turning it into a bit of an education piece. And I told her that at the rate she's going, she'll be able to sit for her license exams. Once she's back in action, she'll just need the formality of the classes, but the practical side, she'll have it down.
Perfect. It sounds like she's going to do you out of a job soon, mate.
Yeah, hey, that's okay. It's I'll take it. I'm ready. I'm probably ready for retirement anyway. This horse could probably go to pasture.
All right. Thanks again, mate. All the best.
All right. Take care.